Registrar Sheila Naughton to read the minutes of the last private business meeting.
An ordinary private business meeting of the University Philosophical Society was held on the 8th of December with the President Matthew Mooney the chair. The minutes were read and signed without objection. There were no questions, no fines, and no reports to be read. There were no motions on notice and there were no motions not on notice. So, welcome back everyone. I'm so happy to see such a full chamber. I have just come from a weekend of doing panto. Oh yes I have. Oh yes I have. Oh yes I have. Okay, obviously never into a panto, it's a rule of three, lads. Okay, so anyway, over Christmas I always love seeing everybody like shopping, over Christmas time. And I was in the supermarket and there was this couple, and I saw the man in the couple. He went and he got this crate of bud, and he went up to his wife and he said, oh look, 20 bottles of bud for a tenner. And she said, put that back, we can't afford that. And next thing anyway, she goes and she picks up face cream, and he says, put that back, there's no way we can afford it, that's 20 euros. And she says, well, what are you talking about? It's going to make me look young and attractive. And he says, well, it's only 20 bottles of bud and they only cost a tenner. So, but anyway, about moving on from that, when it comes to Christmas, I always just find that we just end up eating loads of food that we just don't really like. Like be honest with yourselves. Do you really like turkey that much? After a night out, you never go to KFT, do you? You don't. And then when we get the turkey, we just stuff with a load of meat that we actually want to eat. So I do think it's really pointless, all the food. Also, literally don't get me started on trifle. I freaking hate trifle. I don't know who ever thought it was a good idea to put sherry in a dessert. And I also don't know anybody who at any point, eats an entire sherry and is like, I'm going on a rager, lads! I don't know, maybe they just end up being the designated driver, or they don't want to be the designated driver. But anyway, I learned a trick over Christmas. So, and I want everybody, I learned how to tell the time using the sun. So, I know that's actually weird. So I'm going to teach you all how to do it. So let's pretend the sun is right here in the middle. Okay, so everybody, you all have to raise one hand up like this. Everybody do it with me. You're going to learn. This is a really good learning experience. And then you raise your hand like this. And then you look at your watch. Oh, it's 8:15, so there'll be no further business to be adjourned.
Are there any objections to me signing these minutes, the true and accurate record of the last private business meeting? There being none, I shall duly sign. Mr. Treasurer, are there any fines?
There are no fines.
Mr. Secretary, are there any reports to be read?
There are no reports to be read. Time for questions is now open.
Mr. Secretary, are there any motions on notice?
There are no motions on notice.
Mr. Secretary, are there any motions not on notice?
There are no motions not on notice.
Time for questions is now closed.
This brings us on to general business of the society. Are there any motions to be raised in general business? No? Okay. There being no further business, our Secretary Michael will retire now and return shortly with our guests for the debate.
Lisa, I would never make fun of this topic nor the people speaking in it, so just enjoy these minutes as like a little thing to ease the nerves of the people who are speaking. Okay, so just, they're totally separate, right? I'll keep the minutes like myself, short and incredibly attractive. So, anyway, let's focus on something that I really think should be public business, just in general. Who saw Mariah Carey's New Year's Eve performance? Like, please, just raise your hand if you saw it. Okay, for any of you who didn't, go home and look it up. Like, you missed out something awful you're also not going to get in minutes. So, like, it's as if she really did give 2016 the performance that it deserved. Like, I don't know what happened to her. Did she just wake up and think that she was like Britney Spears circa 2007? Like, it was the most awful thing. It was like when you go to a wedding and your drunk uncle gets up and tries to sing like Danny Boy or something. She reminded me of like that person in a group project who has done no work and then they have to stand up and then present the class. and like it was almost like the 2016 just channels The Little Mermaid and decided it was Ursula and we're like, whoa, there goes your voice, sorry, in the middle of it. So no matter how hungover you may have felt on New Year's Day, you didn't feel as bad as Mariah Carey did. But I actually did guess, there were a bit of me didn't really understand why everybody was so shocked, because my parents had the Mariah Carey lip sync taught me when I was 9. So there being no further business, the meeting adjourned.
Are there any objections to me signing these minutes, the true and accurate record of the last public business meeting? There being none, I shall duly sign. So welcome everyone to the bill, where the motion before the House is that this House supports unrestricted access to abortion. I just go through the standing order for tonight's debate. Speeches are a maximum of 10 minutes in length for guests and 7 minutes for student speakers. After the first minute of each speech, there will be a bell. After this, speakers and members of the audience are free to offer points of information right up until the last minute of their speech, which will be indicated by another bell. To point to the Irish returns sheets on your seats. These go towards rating performance of our student speakers and go towards the oratory medal at the end of the year. Please remember to fill them out as the debate goes along and hand them to Mark and Clodagh at the end of the debate. Just go through the order of speakers. So on the proposition, we have Izzy Sweeney, junior freshman in Jewish and Islamic Civilizations and Russian, Anna Cosgrave, founder of the Repeal Project and abortion rights activist, Fruity Emmett, senior freshman in English and Drama, and Una Malali, journalist and abortion rights activist. And then just a slight change for the opposition side that's presented on the oratory returns sheets. So instead of Blondin speaking first, Kira Rourke will now speak first, and Blondin will now be speaking in third. So to go through that, it's Kira Rourke first, who's a senior officer in philosophy. Second is Hugh Fitzgibbon, who's a senior freshman in law and political science. Third is Bodily Brainon, who's a junior officer in law. And fourth is Kate Kleinel, who's senior freshman of philosophy, politics, economics, and sociology. So without any further ado, I'm going to call on Izzy Sweeney to open up the debate.
We as a society tend not to trust women. We think of them differently to how we think of men. We see them going out in a short skirt and we think she doesn't know how to dress herself. We think that she didn't make the consideration when she left the house. We see her speaking up for herself and we tend to listen to men more than we tend to listen to women. We think that she is shrill. We think that she is not able for high-power jobs in case she falls pregnant. We think she is not strong enough to just carry things in a physical aspect. We think she's not able to be funny. We think she's not able to look after herself on her own. We tend to medically think she is faking pain more often than we think men are. We think she'll take advantage of a service that is granted to her. We think she's not capable of knowing what's best to her. We think she is not able to have access to medical procedures that she may desperately need. We think that she is not able to make choices based on the decisions best for her. We think she's not able to have unrestricted access to abortion lest she creates a culture of it. We don't ask her, we don't consider what she thought, we don't ask them generally because we just decide as a society to make decisions for them. When some of you think of this debate, you think that this would be a great relief. You would love to live in a country that accepted that your body is your own choice. However, we some of you think differently. Some of you think that this would create a free-for-all. You place a judgment upon women. You think that women are incapable of being granted with this right, and you put a lack of trust upon them. I don't think that anyone thinks of having an abortion as plan A. I don't think that anyone makes that decision lightly, because it's not a particularly easy decision to make. It's not a particularly nice thing to go through. And it's certainly not a nice thing to have to do when you have to travel to another country. But even if you didn't, I don't think it's particularly easy to do so. And I don't think it's particularly easy to tell your friends to do that you would do that. It is a personal choice that takes a while to come to. When an egg becomes fertilized in a woman's uterus, it is surprisingly the woman who is best placed to make the decision what happens after that. It is the woman who understands what is best for herself. It is the woman who understands what is best for that group of cells growing in her uterus. If the woman chooses to seek a termination, it is not because she believes that pregnancy will slightly inconvenience her. It is because she believes that this was the best thing for her in her life. It is not because she sees this as something that would inconvenience her life and change her life, even though it would. It is because she understands and appreciates that this is best for her. No, thank you. I will in a minute. Unrestricted access means that you appreciate that woman's ability to make that choice, that you know that she is best placed to make that choice. It is not that that woman believes that she is killing someone or something. It is that she is making that decision based on her best decisions. Yeah, Belana, go ahead.
I was just going to say, wouldn't you agree that a society that where women are put in this negative situation, wouldn't you think that a society like that is deeply flawed, and we should address the fact that women feel they can't be pregnant and continue their job, or they can't be a single parent? Isn't that the real issue? And isn't abortion not actually addressing the problems that are
Shame.
Firstly, as a child who came out of a lone parent family who believes that it is something that is perfectly fine to do, it is incredibly difficult to do so, mainly because it is incredibly difficult to fund things like childcare, even though you don't think it would be. Secondly, I don't think anyone thinks of abortion like that. I don't think anyone sees it as a solution, as a reason in which. Sorry, let me think about this, because it just seems so silly to me that you think like that. I don't think when a woman makes that decision that she is thinking that any of those things would be bad. She is just making that decision based on herself. A woman doesn't necessarily get an abortion because she thinks that those options aren't there for her. She just realizes that her own life is more important than that, and her own decisions that she's made up to those points are important to do that. But I think basically what you're saying there is, Blonde, is that you don't trust women to make this decision, that you don't believe that their reasoning to be valid, and you're placing it. No, thanks, Blonde. That you don't believe that they're able to make this decision with within society. You don't trust them not to abuse this. You distrust them in not knowing how to control themselves. You judge them on how they're valuing their lives. You're treating them basically as a vessel. You treat them as if their life is not their own. You believe in the placing of restrictions upon women, because how on earth could they possibly know what is best for them? How could they not lose the run of themselves? Even in cases of gender-selective abortions, or abortions based upon the quality of life the potential fetus will have, they too, while it may seem apparent to many women in the room and many people in the room, including myself, it's still a decision made by a woman because she is best placed to make that decision, because she is best placed to appreciate and understand the context in which that fetus would become a baby, and then a child, and then what it would mean for them and her. You're placing a judgment on women as if they cannot possibly understand what would be best for them, that they cannot appreciate the fact that potentially they still could have a high-paying job even if they did carry through with their pregnancy. They are still able to separate the two things, but they decide with their own knowledge that this is the best way to go about it. And the main thing is that even if we had what you're talking about when it comes to childcare and when it came to having an equal society in terms of how women are viewed, you would still have women having unrestricted, going and having abortions. The way that the Irish society especially treats women is that they act as if abortion doesn't happen in Ireland, but it happens every single day, and 12 women travel to England every single day, and it is cruel and unusual to make women do this. Your judgment and your distrust of women pushes them out and makes them suffer for in reality nothing but your own moral judgment that you have placed upon them. Around the time of the marriage equality referendum, I remember very clearly sitting with a group of friends talking about how awful the whole debate had been, how terrible the judgment had been for the LGBT community to have to listen to their whole lives being examined on a public sphere, how they were being distrusted and for so long had been by their communities and their states. Then someone mentioned how abortion and how awful it would be for us when we eventually, hopefully, got our turn. And generally, when social issues come into the public sphere to be debated, they come down to two things: trust and judgment. It's impossible to know which way this particular debate will go, whether it will be about the morality of abortion or whether it'll be based solely on access. What I hope to have left you with is to question yourself, question the judgment you're making upon women, the distrust you're placing upon them, and if you vote opposition this evening. What I ask you to do is let's trust women. Let's specifically trust women if we ever get the chance to repeal the A's. But for the time being, please vote proposition this evening.
I would like to thank the speaker for her comments, and I'd like to call on Ciara Ward to open up the case for the opposition.
Hi everyone. You often hear in this debate that many people on this side of the debate are well-intentioned but ideologically driven, and that this side are driven by the power of real people's experiences, especially experiences of difficult and traumatic pregnancies. I've always been curious about this. Do people really think that people involved in pro-life campaigning just don't know anyone who's had an unplanned or difficult pregnancy? Pretty much everyone at least knows, and most people are close to someone this has happened to. Pretty much all of you here know or are someone who had an unplanned pregnancy or was born because of one. Why would anyone think that pro-life people bypass this part of life? I don't know. That's because it is part of life. When women have sex with men, they risk getting pregnant and men don't. And when things go wrong, it's usually the woman who pays for it. And this is where abortion comes in, and where it always has come in. Someone gets pregnant and doesn't want to be. And if we look at studies where women say why they did not want to be pregnant and opted for abortion, the top reasons they give are not that they do not like the physical state of being pregnant. It's rarely about becoming unpregnant. It's about the burdens of the child that the child will bring once it's born. For example, according to a 2005 Guttmacher Institute study, the three most common reasons, each cited by 3/4 of the patients, were concern for or responsibility to other individuals, the inability to afford a child, and the belief that having a baby would interfere with work, school, or the ability to care for dependents. Half said they did not want to be a single parent or are having problems with their husband or partner. There is then a conflict between what women's bodies do and what women want to be able to achieve in life and what they need to do for other people. And this is why parts of the feminist movement argue for abortion. Because to achieve equality with men who don't get pregnant in a world designed by men for themselves, this conflict needs to be resolved. But the thing that needs changing isn't women's bodies. There is something abhorrent about a society that makes women choose between careers and their children, between the welfare of the children they already have given birth to and the organism whose DNA is half their own growing inside them. That is not a choice anybody should have to ever make. It's the society that sets the terms of the choice that gives women those options that need to change. You can only choose between the options that are available to you. And this is not a set of options we have to make women choose from. Free choice doesn't happen in a vacuum. For most women, abortion is a last resort. A society that makes women choose between their career and a last resort is not an equal one. It is a deeply sexist one that has based itself on the assumption that it's perfectly reasonable to cater to the standard worker who doesn't get pregnant, a man, and expect women to just work around that. There's the question of whether or not a fetus is human. But no one can deny that a substantial proportion of women who get abortions do believe that. And can you imagine what it feels like, the burden of that choice? I think people have the right to never have to make that choice. Not to have to make an either-or decision, but to be given both. Men have never faced that trade-off. Why should we? That's why Feminists for Life slogan is refuse to choose. We should be demanding both. Women shouldn't carry, as well as the second shift, all the moral burdens of a capitalist androcentric society in which the consequences of a woman's body functioning in a perfectly normal way become disastrous for her. This situation, this array of options is man-made, and it's something we can change, and it's something we have a duty to change. We can't shift the weight of that obligation onto women and call it a right. Yeah.
Do you think it's legitimate to commandeer a woman's body to sustain another life?
I mean, I think I don't think that pregnancy has to be common. Like, if somebody is pregnant and abortion isn't available to them, that woman's body is still her own. I know it's what I'm saying is really difficult, because I'm saying that the life of the, or what I think is the child and what other people might think isn't a child, is worth preserving, that we have to do what we can to help both. I know that's difficult, but that's what I'm saying. So that's one half of why I don't think there's a right to abortion. The other reason, the main reason that I'm against abortion, is simply that I think all humans are equal, and I think that living, growing organisms with human parents are human too. It's pretty simple. But for some reason, some people think that whether a fetus is human is a difficult question, a matter of opinion. But its parents were human. Left to its own devices, it will grow into something that we all recognize as a human baby. And what species do you think it belongs to? Then people say that being human involves more than being part of the human species. It's something more, something mysterious. Maybe sentience, a certain level of consciousness, size, or being able to live independently. Who can tell? Some people even deny that a human fetus is alive. So grass is alive, mosquitoes are alive, and a growing human organism isn't? This is imbuing the word alive with mysterious, mystical qualities that we just don't imbue it with in any other situation. Whether or not a fetus is alive is only a debatable question if you accept this mystical, mysterious meaning of the word life, which as an agnostic I'm not inclined to do. And then, faced with this mysterious sense of being alive, and this mysterious extra bar members of the human species must meet to become human beings, we're supposed to throw our hands up in the air and accept that when a fetus turns into a human is a mystery. That when a fetus becomes something that is alive is a matter for extremely complicated philosophical debate, too hopelessly complex to ever be resolved. When in fact the bottom line is that of course a fetus is alive, and of course a fetus, what does that mean? A minute left? Okay, thanks. And of course a fetus of human parentage is human. The question then becomes, are all living humans equal? At their heart, arguments for abortion are extremely discriminatory. All humans are equal, except for the ones who are too young to live independently, or except for the ones who aren't big enough yet, except for the ones who are located inside their mother's uterus. Or maybe it's that their brains aren't developed enough yet. Maybe it's that they aren't of value to anyone else yet. Maybe it's that they aren't conscious yet. These are all specific reasons that people have given me. And you have to ask yourself, which one are you going to accept? So much of the moral progress made over the past 500 years has involved recognizing the obvious humanity of people who are left outside the ever-expanding circle of empathy. Let's not narrow that circle again in the name of arbitrary hoops humans have to pass through before they're worthy of our respect and protection. There's a right to be treated equally. There's a right not to have your life threatened because your family is financially insecure, or because your mother might be judged by her respectable peers if she gives birth to you. There's a right for an unwanted, unvalued person to be treated as well as everyone else. Abortion props up the structures that put women in impossible dilemmas, and we're all better off without it. Thank you.
We would like to thank the speaker for her comments, and I would like to call on Anna Cosgrave to continue the case for the proposition.
Just get my little timer. Okay. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back because it's in this room where I first began to understand what it was to debate. It's in this room where I first debated against a priest on the very issue about sex underneath the Catholic doctrine. It was in this room where I had a priest tell me that female masturbation was as selfless as giving yourself a Valentine's card. So it's good to be back. Before I start, I always think it's important to give just like a little bit of context before I start to rebut the last speaker's speech, and then just to move into the kind of substantive bit of my argument. So, in the absolute utopian, magical world which I wish I lived in, abortion wouldn't actually be a reality, okay? It wouldn't be something that is needed. Maybe it would be amazing if pleasure and pregnancy wasn't as closely linked, or that contraception worked 100% of the time, okay? So this idea that I am anti-life is absolutely farcical. What's even more farcical is that the other side can't actually be called anti-choice, because that's an actual fact what we're talking about. When we listen to the other side, what we're hearing is that all measures, they're absolutely, completely and utterly pro-birth. So what we heard, is it Kira? Yeah, so what we heard from Kira in the beginning of her speech was this idea, this kind of sexist, discriminatory nature, and she mentioned women and careers and having to choose career over
Those were
childbirth.
self-reported reasons.
Again, even if they are self-reported reasons, what I want to know is, when is it okay for me to decide what someone else should do? And if I restrict what they do, yeah, go ahead.
It's okay when your actions are directly affecting another human being.
That's correct, but if the result of that person action means they can still carry out and do so, this is access abortion, so they can still get an abortion. As I said earlier, abortion is an absolute reality. No matter what is debated tonight, even sometimes talking about the issue actually gives it insult, is that there are 12 women in Ireland that are packing their bags to be temporarily exiled, temporarily criminalised, and they're going to England to access something. So no matter whether there's access or not, it's going to happen. So you cannot avoid that fact anymore. It's never going to change. If we look at our counterparts in Nordic countries where abortion has been really widely accessible, we know that those statistics stay the same. This idea that a watershed on demand, abortion's going to happen all the time. But anyway, I want to talk tonight a little bit about the realities, the moralities. I want to talk about autonomy, this idea of agency, and just want to talk about rights. Like, honestly, every time I come to speak about it, go ahead.
Presuming you do believe in human rights, and this is the basis of your debate, what proof do you have that the unborn child is not human? Because that's what your entire debate depends on, surely.
That's your opinion. I am of the opinion that it is up to someone to decide whether a fetus is something which they wish to carry to term and to give birth to. I don't even like using the word abortion sometimes. It's terminate a pregnancy. Also, so I wanted to start off by talking about the realities. The realities are 90% of abortions are in the first 12 weeks. 80% are in the first 10 weeks. This idea, when we talk about, do I support kind of open access to late term? And I echo the sentiments of medical professionals, and I echo the sentiments of legislators. I am not a person that was going to meet a woman and advise her whether she should or shouldn't have an abortion. And it's just to get this idea about a baby versus a fetus, okay? It is not a human being. It is a group of cells. We're talking, if you genuinely believe that this has more rights than a full sentient being, what you're hearing is they don't trust someone with that decision, but they trust them with a child. You can't allow someone to make a decision that's in the best interest of their life, and you're expecting them to raise a child. I'm sorry, I said I'd curse. That is a fucking abomination. You really need to reevaluate your moral compass. There is a spectrum of empathy, okay? You do not have to agree with abortion. That is completely understandable. So to both my colleagues that kind of gave points of information, that's totally fine. Don't have one. I'm not advocating for anyone to have an abortion. It's if they find themselves in a crisis situation or they feel that they're not ready. Again, I want to talk about this idea of safety. Like, we're talking about basic healthcare. By not allowing access to abortion in Ireland, what you are doing is you are prolonging the experience. You are prolonging the access that that person has to legal, safe healthcare. You would rather shun and ignore. The 13th Amendment is this lovely thing that allows our citizens travel abroad, but doesn't recognise here in Ireland. It's gas. Also, when we talk about this thing, it's kind of complicated, we're in the film. It's the fundamental self-serving bias, okay? It's this idea of cognitive dissonance, that we somehow we say things but we don't follow suit. So I am pro-choice. So what am I doing? I'm calling on a referendum so people can have a vote as to whether people are allowed access. What we hear from the other side is you're ending a life, that the women, 54% of women who access abortion are mothers. They are saying, without using the words, that the mothers of Ireland are murderers. That's what they're saying. Are they following suit with actual action that we can say they're working towards this? No. Why aren't they at the airports? Honestly, tell me that. Why aren't you at the airport stopping these people? It does not make cognitive sense. It doesn't. And again, you don't have to agree with it, but don't make that decision for someone else. Then we want to talk about this idea of like agency. My mouth is so dry. Give us a bit of water, will you? Woo! Woo! I'm getting fired up. I'm telling you. Here we go. Yeah, so this idea of like agency and autonomy and freedom, okay? The only thing that separates women, and I want to kind of include and be intersectional, like cis or trans or anyone that, you know, is able to carry a child, from the moment that we're born, our country violates like our actual constitutional bodily rights. Our country would rather put us through an ordeal. And this isn't my ordeal, okay? I was thinking of different ways that I could do my speech, and I was going to like come in with a candle and have a 1 minute silence for all the people that we actually know have died because of the very thing that we're debating, or bring in 160,000 women who since the 1980s have made this decision. And again, just the thing is, I empathize, and I'm not, despite how I'm acting now, I'm not an angry person. And do you know what? If I actually thought a fetus was a child, then, you know, maybe I'd reconsider my decision. But the reality is that this issue, you have no idea. If you met the people that are having abortions, like, I honestly think, and I know, no, I'm gonna get to that. So Kira said as well, like, what about women that regret their abortions?
I didn't actually mention that.
Oh, sorry. Well, often we talk about people that regret their abortions. I'm completely in support of those women, like having adequate and appropriate kind of counselling and care. But again, they made that choice to have an abortion. Then, what else do you want to talk about? There's so many things. I kind of lost my timer. What time am I on? Oh, 8 minutes. Yeah, so this idea as well that we punish people, okay, so contraception. So let's say, I always try to bring things like back to first principle, or if I'm talking to someone that just finds the idea of abortion so kind of morally abhorrent, or they have such a visceral knee-jerk reaction. Like when I was first in Trinity, I was a bit nervous saying the word abortion. I used to be like, so what do you think about abortion? Like it's been made so deeply hard to talk about. We've been shamed and silenced. What I always try to say is, there isn't a good or bad abortion. We can't limit this idea or put restrictions. Because this idea that, you know, a lad could go out on a nightclub, he'd go out to a nightclub, and that his condom breaks, and then that's on the woman to carry a child. Had the condom not broken, then we wouldn't really have this discussion. It just seems so nonsensical. It's just above and beyond. But I just want to say to anyone in this room, you don't have to believe me, or you don't have to believe in abortion, but you should look around the room and you should look at the women. Sorry. Whew, I'm a bit tired and emotional. And like, ask yourself, would you like trust them with a choice about their life? Like, would you? Like, look around the room. Seriously, ask yourself this, because that's what we're dealing with. Oh my gosh, I'm crying in the fill. What the hell? What the hell? But seriously, this is the most pressing human rights issue in Ireland at the moment. You are going to be part of history if you honestly come on board. And it is okay that you don't agree with me, but do not limit my choice to make a decision that's in the best interest of my healthcare and my life. And like, yeah, I would really, really beg anyone in this room for dignity and respect, for humility. Like, please propose this motion.
speaker for her final comments. And now, before I call the next speaker to talk, I might just remind all members of the audience that while this is clearly, as this is clearly a very sensitive topic, just to please keep order while the guests and student speakers are speaking. They only have these 7 or 10 minutes to speak, and it really does interrupt the debate if people are speaking over them. I might remind you that you may offer points of information at one point throughout the debate outside of protected time, so between the first and 6th minute for a student speaker and the first and 9th minute for a guest speaker. You may offer it, and they may or they may not accept. So if they don't accept, just sit down. But please don't be shouting and disrupting the debate. Thank you. So now I'd like to call on Keith Fitzgibbon to continue the case for the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen. So I agree with what Izzy said in her point on society placing a judgment on women, but she asserts that it is only unrestricted access to abortion that could recognise a woman's right to choose. And I hope that you realise throughout my speech that this goal can be achieved without unrestricted access to abortion. But I must admit I was quite apprehensive about speaking this evening for 2 main reasons. Firstly, because the taboo in Trinity associated with anything that appears to deviate from the pro-choice narrative, and secondly, because I'm a man. And I know that to many people, the notion of a man speaking about abortion and whether or not it should be permitted in this country feeds into the patriarchal structures of our society, and that the idea that a woman must ask a man to be given reproductive rights is ridiculous. But fundamentally, I believe that the abortion debate is too important not to speak on. We need to all feel comfortable in engaging in the national dialogue which we are all entering into as we approach this potential referendum. And just like we look towards straight people to act as allies of the LGBTQ community during the same-sex marriage referendum, we must also look towards the men to support or at least engage with the pro-choice movement. And I'd like to add a caveat before I go any further. I am pro-choice, and I firmly believe that the 8th Amendment is a dark stain on our nation's laws, and I would actively participate in rallies and marches and calls for it to be repealed. And I agree a lot with what the proposition has said with regards to individual autonomy and the right to choose. Our society prides itself in being Western, democratic and fair. Yet even now in 2017, women are systematically denied the right to bodily integrity and the right to choose themselves whether they should get an abortion or not. And undeniably, this is abhorrent that women who are victims of rape or women who have become pregnant as a result of incest are forced by the state to carry out with the pregnancy. And it perpetuates inequality in the country when only those who can afford to go away to England for a West End show can afford to get an abortion. And the pro-choice argument provides a solution for everyone. It allows those who morally and on principle disagree with abortion to not get one, and those who want to get this form of medical treatment to make the decision for themselves. So it is an umbrella solution for the issue of abortion, and this is why it is called pro-choice and not pro-abortion. However, this debate is not a debate between pro-life and pro-choice. It is not whether we should allow abortion or not generally. Rather, we are being asked to discuss unrestricted access to abortion. And this is where things get less black and white and their grey area is introduced. And this isn't just a grey area for me, but I believe a lot of people who would vote to repeal and a lot of people in Middle Ireland, outside of Trinity's liberal echo chamber, would feel the same way. But before I can go into these legitimate restrictions, there are 2 questions which must be addressed. Firstly, how can someone be pro-choice and not support complete access to abortion? And secondly, if I support the concept of individual autonomy, how could I support restrictions on this autonomy? Well, to answer the first question, and how I can still be pro-choice and not support this motion, I have a few points to make. I believe that pro-choice exists on a spectrum. We have on the one end the complete and unrestricted access to abortion argument where individual autonomy always triumphs. And on the other end are people who simply disagree with the 8th Amendment as a constitutional provision which makes abortions unconstitutional. So within the pro-choice movement are a lot of different viewpoints, and many people would have reservations about voting to repeal the 8th Amendment until we know exactly what would replace it. And to not listen to or to ignore these reservations or concerns would be the hubris of the pro-choice movement. And it is one of the reasons why it is widely accepted that if a referendum was to be held on the issue tomorrow, it would probably fail. Moreover, I think that being a member of a movement should allow me to critique it. I think that because I'm pro-choice doesn't mean that I can't voice my concerns about the narrative that's been emerging in recent times. And I think that airing these concerns does not amount to portraying the movement, but instead is indicative of my deep wish to see it succeed. And moving on to the second question then of how can I champion individual autonomy if I also support restrictions of it? This is a relatively easy answer a question to answer. The fact is, individual autonomy is often restricted. You have a freedom to marry, yet you cannot marry a sibling, or you cannot enter a marriage if you're already married. You have a freedom of speech, yet you are subject to many libel laws. And you have a freedom to vote, yet you must be a certain age and vote within certain restrictions. And the same can be said with regards to the issue of abortion. No, thank you. If we repeal the 8th Amendment and decriminalise abortion in Ireland, we can still place restrictions on the regime without violating individual autonomy. And what type of restrictions would I be in favour of? Well, for me, third trimester abortion. Now, to clarify, I'm not talking about where the fetus is close to the due date and a complication has arisen and it is apparent that a miscarriage is inevitable and it is medically advised to terminate the pregnancy, and quite similar to the Savita Halpin-Hour case. But I'm talking about cases where during the third trimester a decision is made by the person to terminate the pregnancy, and this decision could be a result of finding that the child may have a disability. And I acknowledge Anna's point that the vast majority of terminations occur in the first 12 weeks, but on your side of the house, we would be allowing third trimester terminations, so I believe it is something that should be addressed. And I believe that the reason why a lot of people who are pro-life and pro-choice, are against this type of abortion is because of the way in which we recognise the rights of the unborn changes as we get closer to full term. At the moment, the current legal arrangement places the rights of the unborn equal to the rights of the mother, and this is regrettable. In the beginning, it is just a ball of cells, as Anna asserts, and it can't really be seen as a human being for the vast majority of people. But it is my contention, and people will disagree with this, and that's fine because this is a debate. But I believe that the rights of the unborn grow and expand throughout the pregnancy. There is a difference between the rights of the unborn at 8 weeks and the rights of the unborn at 8 months. And this is seen in the way in which the doctors are much more invasive and proactive in their attempts to prevent a miscarriage at 8 months than they are at 8 weeks. Because we, as humans, innately see that as the pregnancy nears full term, the fetus is less of an abstract construct and closer to being a baby or a human life. So in a nutshell, the rights of the unborn are not fixed. We're in a state of flux, and as we get closer to 9 months, there's more of a balancing act between the rights of the mother and the rights of the unborn. So therefore, restriction on third trimester abortions is firstly within the pro-choice mantra, secondly, not an illegitimate interference with individual autonomy, and thirdly, something which is brought forward by the pro-life movement regularly, yet often ignored by pro-choice campaigners. What I hope to show you in this speech is that you can oppose unrestricted access to abortion and still be pro-choice. Whilst the individual autonomy argument put forward by the proposition is convincing, it is not infallible. There are situations where restrictions on individual autonomy are legitimate, and I've used third trimester abortions as an example of this. I hope you'll oppose this motion knowing that you can still wear your repeal jumper with pride and conviction, because this debate is not a debate between pro-life and pro-choice, but it is a debate between completely unrestricted autonomy and legitimately restricted autonomy. Thank you.
I'm going to be honest with you, and this is probably a weird way to start this side of the house, but I couldn't have an abortion. I mean, it kind of goes without saying I'm a man, but if I was a woman and if I'd somehow grown up in the exact same circumstances and experiences, I could not have an abortion. I would be terrified of the quashed potential, the power in my hands. And through a lot of the abortion debate in society, I thought about this, and I tried to reconsider it, justify my liberal pro-choice output with my internal pro-life struggle. And then I thought, I'm a man. I am not going to get pregnant. But my God, if I have put this much thought into whether or not I would get an abortion, how much thought have the countless women that have gotten abortions put into it? My name is Ferdy Emmett, and my speech is going to cover two main arguments. Firstly, why being pro-choice, in my opinion, is the right side, and secondly, why Ireland requires unrestricted access. So choice versus life. Two words that define either side. Both words are propaganda, words with much more power and niceties than what they actually stand for. Let's start at the start of a pregnancy, sex, and why sex controls everything we do. Because the large majority of people at around age 15 get a sex drive. It's an evolutionary thing. It means that we are convinced to keep the population going. But that's not what it is in modern society. It's now supposedly the ultimate source of pleasure. Great way to end a night out. It's a unique, shared experience. It fills the body with endorphins and can boost self-esteem. The media portray it as the ultimate goal. It's the greatest experience you could ever have, supposedly. From books to TV, we're told as kids and teenagers how great sex is. And yet it comes with its consequences. Pain, STIs, or unwanted pregnancy. I went to a Catholic school, as I'd say a fair few people in this room might have done. And I was told about condoms once. I was 17 at this point. People had been having sex for a while. We were told, because we're a Catholic school, I'm not meant to tell you this, but wear a condom. It's common sense. Common sense. How can something not in our education system, something that we're not taught on a daily basis in school, be common sense? It isn't an inherent urge like sex. With sex you kind of just know what to do. No, we're taught nothing. In fact, Ireland is one of the worst sexual educations in the Western world. Even if a condom is remembered, if it's not put on properly, or if it's out of date, a girl can get pregnant. And our society is filled with myths. A guy once tried to convince me that a girl can't get pregnant if it's their first time. How are we supposed to allow this in our society if we do not properly educate? So if a girl gets pregnant because society doesn't tell people what to do properly, how can society sit back and say, sorry love, it's your problem? No, I'm not saying that everyone is an idiot. I'm not saying that every man is going to forget a condom, but it only takes one for an unwanted pregnancy. Now, of course, this still negates the issue of life, that by having an abortion, you are ending a life, or the potential of life. And the core of the pro-life argument is, why should we give people that power, give women that power? I mean, it isn't a daily choice. There is no metaphor that can cover this or make it seem more logical. This is the conscious ending of an almost life. But I don't think it is. And scientists have argued on both sides whether it is or not, and this is entirely down to personal opinion, because one scientist can say one thing and another scientist can say another. And there's no definitive proof, and that is why everybody here should make that choice for themselves. No, thank you. But why I don't think it is. It's a weird metaphor, but I'm going to go with it. Every single sperm in my body is alive, swimming around. Every time they leave my body, they die. Potential of life quashed. Last time any of the men in this room orgasmed, they could have killed the person that cured cancer, an argument often put forward by a pro-life argument. No, thank you. These sperm can't live without me as a host. And conception, surely this is the same. The fetus cannot live without the woman as a host. Why is this the start of life? It cannot survive outside of the uterus. Every single sperm has the potential to do something great, just as every single egg has, just as every single fetus has. But why do we draw the line at conception? No, thank you. On to my second point, why I support abortions without restrictions to their accessibility. Now, this isn't no restrictions. This isn't unlicensed doctors or untested procedures. This is a scenario where women don't have to jump over hurdles once they've made this choice. Restrictions include only allowing women who have been raped, which is a key reason abortion is necessary. But once you put this restriction in place, it comes to the issue of, but have you really been raped? Rape itself can be a very traumatizing experience, in no way helped by an unwanted pregnancy. And then on top of that, women will have to go through the legal procedures, the public scrutiny, the people trying to convince them that they're not, and ultimately a judicial system which unfortunately doesn't always support the victim. Other restrictions could be for age. Under 18-year-olds could have to get parental permission. If a girl has very strict parents who would chastise her for having sex, let alone getting pregnant, how does she tell them? If they're anti-abortion, they'll make her raise the baby as well, you should have known better. For that child to be a life lesson, a punishment, is that any kind of life? By restricting it through price, we make it a thing for those who can afford it, which it already is, because if you can afford a flight to England, you can get an abortion. I understand that we must take steps, and we won't get unrestricted access overnight. Totally fair. But unrestricted access, in my opinion, no thank you, should be our ultimate aim. But restrictions restrict those who need it most. It isn't abortion on tap. You're going to have to see a doctor. A doctor will quite probably try and talk you out of it. But this is abortion without the hurdles. I couldn't have an abortion, but that's because I come from a privileged position. I could afford a child. My parents, although not probably very happy about it, would look after the child while I finish college and get my degree. Not every person has this luxury, and I shouldn't let my ability for my life not to be ruined by a child hinder others. We need a society where choice is paramount, and we need to trust every woman to make that choice, to live with any potential consequences themselves. It's not up to us to say what's best for them. Thank you.
We'd like to thank the speaker for his comments, and I'd like to call on bodily to continue the case for the opposition.
Good evening, everyone. I think in light of how the debate's happened so far, I just want to say, first of all, I think every person in this room is here to discuss this topic because they want to do the right thing. And I absolutely respect that each and every one of you has made the effort to be here and think about what the right thing is to do. And I don't, I kind of hoped that we could all come here in good faith, assuming that everyone was trying to do the right thing and that there wouldn't be a kind of personalised attributing of motives to either side. But I would just say that I think everyone's trying to do the right thing, and I don't think it's useful to kind of say, like, for example, just in Anna's speech, she responded to what she thought we think. Well, why don't you just respond to what we actually say? That's probably a more productive way to debate. I'd really like to, I'm going to try and address some of what's come up so far in my speech, but I'd like to draw attention to two main issues, and they're both going to come from a feminist perspective, because I'm a feminist, and I think that the most important thing to do here is kind of listen to the people talking about these issues and learn from them. So as Ciara already started discussing, if you define humans by what they can do, by how they rely on others, what their relationship is with others, how much of a burden they are on others, rather than what they are, that's an inherently ableist view. And Rebecca Stapleford has written about this for the organisation Secular Pro-Life, and she has spoken about her experience as a disabled person who is pro-life, and she has criticised the functionalism, and she has pointed out that all this speech about how an unborn child is a burden or an imposition, she has said she is dependent on others for many aspects of her daily life, and that burden on others to look after her exists, and she asks, well, then am I a burden? Is it okay for people to walk away and not look after me because it damages their bodily integrity? Yes.
Do you not see the fundamental difference in that a fetus literally requires a woman to give up 9 months of her life, potentially more than that? Do you think it is legitimate to commandeer a woman's body for another life?
Firstly, the question of commandeering implies that if someone deliberately got a woman pregnant against her will, that is an incredibly serious crime, and no one here is advocating for it. The fact is, we are confronted by a situation now, and it's, will you allow the destruction of what is a life? And I'm going to go on and talk about that. But secondly, I'm not really equating it. She's equating it. This is a person who's lived with disability, and she's seen the sort of the discourse. No, thank you. That has happened. And secondly, I don't even think your argument makes sense. Up until very recently, a newborn child was completely dependent on its mother, to breastfeed it constantly. And I don't think there would ever be an argument that it would be okay. Obviously, it's a big ask, and we're not saying that society shouldn't do everything to help and support women in that situation. But under that logic, is it okay would it be morally acceptable to not care for the infant? I don't think so. And the issue of disability, I think, is really important because the Nordic model was brought up as somehow positive. And in fact, I would just kind of like everyone in the room to think about, what we can see what happens when abortion is not limited. for example, 96% of pregnancies in France where the fetus has Down syndrome end in abortion, and the figure in England is 92%. And it has now come to a situation where it is almost a public health goal to get rid of Down syndrome. And I personally think that is the most discriminatory and just wrong thing. And what does it say to the people in society that don't fit in? And because Down syndrome, no thank you, it's not a disease, it's not an illness, it's just a different type of chromosomal arrangement, and it makes you a human being just like anyone else. And if there's a situation where, for example, in England, there is no limit whatsoever if the child has a disability, and Down syndrome is included in that. And the advocacy group Don't Screen Us Out, which is run by people with Down syndrome and their families, has spoken out how MPs consulted with the companies that make prenatal testing for Down syndrome, but didn't actually bother to ask anyone with Down syndrome, by the way, do you think you're a burden on society, or are you happy that you got to live? And if they had, they might have actually learned. And that is also intersectionality, because women with Down syndrome or who have disabilities are women, and it's kind of it's very worrying that they're being left out of this debate. And just quickly, I'd like to address the issue of gendercide, because that was brought up, and what that is the effect of sex-selective abortion, which has had on the number of girls being born. And basically, studies, there's been studies done of the world population, and had the gender ratio remained at natural levels, if there had not been sex-selective abortions in favour of males, there would have been an additional 163 million girls born between 1980 and 2000. That's the entire female population of the US. And the speakers so far have said that we cannot prevent people from having sex-selective abortions. And that's really interesting, because the head, Anne Furedi, the head of the British Pregnancy Association, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service, which is the biggest abortion provider, said, you can't be pro-choice except where you don't like the choice, because that's not pro-choice at all. I completely agree with her, and I'd kind of like to, she's speaking in the context of potentially banning sex-selective abortions. And I'd like to sort of juxtapose that with the experience of a woman called Manju Singh. She is a campaigner against sex-selective abortion in India, and she was the first woman in 10 generations to be born in her family because of the practice of infanticide in favour of males. Yes?
Is that not more of something culturally there in India that men are
thank you. That's a very interesting argument.
Ireland?
I think it's an inherently rather colonialist argument to say, oh, well, if we just teach them our ways, they'll be good feminists like us. The fact is, sex-selective abortions happen in... yes?
So I'm from India, and I would say that's a colonialist argument. I don't agree, in the sense that it is a cultural issue in the country. It is prevalent. It cannot be that. It may be remedied through Western ideals. But when you say that gender abortion should be restricted, and that counts as a restriction to abortion, I'd like to point out that within India, actually abortion is legal. And
I completely understand that point. I just think that it's very interesting to actually listen to this woman who has herself survived this, and she now campaigns against sex-selective abortion. And her statement was, I feel very strongly that I should work with women to try and stop the killing of the girl child. And I'm not really. This isn't even really an argument. It's just a statement about this, comparing these two women. And if anyone here, considers themselves to be pro-choice, but feels uncomfortable with the fact that for example, in Manu Singh's home village, in her area, there's 834 girls born per 1,000 boys in the 0 to 6 age population. If anyone kind of feels that's not right, that there's something kind of sexist about that situation, and then maybe you're not as pro-choice as you would think. And just to rapidly address some of the things that were brought up. Firstly, I think that perhaps, maybe I didn't state my point correctly, Izzy, I think we're in agreement on a huge amount of things, and what I was saying is it's a sick society that ever puts a woman in a position where she has to choose between having a baby and feeding the children she already has. It's a sick society that puts a woman in a position where she feels like she can't, for whatever reason at the stage she is in life, if she's pregnant, there's a stigma. So I'd say ending that is a truly feminist option, and I would just say that the utopian world that Anna said would be a world without abortion, I would just call that a world where we don't have a patriarchal society, and women actually we actually view
It was humor.
and also I'm not even going to address the sex education and that the sperm is alive, because I don't have time to take you back through biology, but I think everyone here, if you read an embryology textbook, you'll understand that. So thank you.
We would like to thank the speaker for fine words, and I would like to call on Una Mullally to close up the case for the proposition.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the Phil and others. Just to rebut some of those points there, concocting a faux feminist argument as if denying a woman bodily autonomy somehow frees her rather than shackles her is ultimately, and I know you won't like this, but it is dishonest. It's a dishonest argument, and it's also very transparent. If I was trying to convince someone of something inherently anti-woman, I too would dress it up from a so-called feminist perspective. But everything regarding one's rights and agency stems from bodily autonomy. And you are not somehow facilitating a woman's personal freedom or potential by forcing her to continue a pregnancy. It is now the fashion of anti-choice campaigners to try and talk about forcing a woman to be pregnant as justifiable from a feminist perspective, and I think that should be called out. It's deliberate obfuscation and reminds me of one of my favourite anti-same-sex marriage arguments, that surely in this enlightened era we should be striving for gender diversity within marriage. The assertion that a referendum, would fail tomorrow is an odd one, considering that all of the polling shows the opposite, so I don't know how you could draw that conclusion. And talking about the right thing is imposing a moral judgment, and I think we should try and steer clear from that where possible. I'm not big on judgment. Accusing people of killing or mentioning that kind of thing is an outrageous charge. And following that logic, presumably we'd be happy then to lock up 12 women a day for murder. No thanks. And if you're not happy to do that, then your argument carries no weight. Anyway, this House supports unrestricted access to abortion. Thinking about this motion, I'm reminded of conversations I had while writing an oral history on the movement for marriage equality and its origins in Ireland going back to the 70s. And while I was writing that book, we were still quite away from the referendum. And one of the strands of debates that emerged from that was marriage itself. Why should LGBT people be striving for this as a thing? And that whether it was a goal for the community at large. And I'm reminded of something that one person who was very critical of marriage as an institution said to me, was that it's hard to have a valid critique of something that you don't have access to. If you aren't allowed an experience of something, then how can you possibly critique its boundaries? Which brings me to what is being debated here this evening, essentially a critique of the access to something Irish society does not have broad experience of in modern times within the borders of this country, which is a hard thing to do because ultimately we're speaking in hypotheticals. In one way, women in Ireland have unrestricted access to abortion, in theory, but their unrestricted access is to the UK and in other parts of Europe. Of course, variables interrupt that unrestricted access, financial ones and difficulties around those who are legally permitted to travel to the UK from Ireland, but the access is unrestricted. Because we are speaking in a hypothetical context, this question is really being posed in an if scenario. So if abortion was made legal within Ireland outside of its current context, where it's only available under very limited conditions, as we know, would that access be unrestricted? Of course it would. Like any legal medical procedure, the access to it would be unrestricted for anyone wanting to avail of it. Remember, we're not talking about access to unrestricted abortion itself, regarding the timeline of when somebody would be permitted to terminate pregnancy. We are in fact talking about the access itself to abortion. So I would like to ask you to consider this. If you want an elective medical procedure, a colonoscopy, an MRI, tonsillectomy, do you have unrestricted access to that medical care? Yes, of course you do. Medical care is provided under the conditions of whether it is necessary and also of whether it is desired. the criteria for accessing medical care is done on a needs basis. Now, of course, there are also variables that interrupt this, waiting lists being the most basic example, but those variables do not deny you the right to access a medical procedure. They merely delay it. So there's no right to deny anyone a medical procedure should they need it. And in a private healthcare setting, you can pretty much pay for whatever elective procedures you want. If I want to remove a kidney from my body for donation, something that would have a sizable impact on my health, I could have that done. What there is a right to, and a constitutional right at that, is the right to bodily integrity. The Irish Constitution protects that right. And this means that you have a right not to have your body or person interfered with. And this means that the state may not do anything to harm your life or your health. In the past, the state did do things to harm a woman's life and or health by denying women whose lives could be saved by abortion that medical procedure. The state adjusted this with the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act in 2013, which defined the circumstances of which abortion in Ireland can be legally performed. Saying that access to abortion should be unrestricted is not about talking about the kinds of abortions that should or should not take place in a hypothetical context of abortion being free, safe and legal in Ireland. That's not what we're talking about. But the language and terminology that surrounds this is important. The use of terms such as unrestricted or on demand are meaningless in a healthcare and medical context. Of course, access to healthcare is unrestricted, and so it should be. No, thank you. On demand has been used by anti-choice campaigners and the media to conjure up in our subconscious and sometimes very blatant desires to remove or restrict the decision-making powers from women. We don't hear about lung transplants being on demand for chronic smokers or dialysis on demand. When anti-choice people use this language, there is a subtext that silly billy women, perhaps, will flock to have abortions just because they're available. How insulting to a woman to insinuate that they would make a serious decision about a pregnancy with such frivolity or impulsiveness. Women are not toddlers running around demanding this and that. A similarly insulting campaign that uses the same logic unfolded during the divorce referendum in 1995, and that infamous slogan, "Hello divorce, goodbye daddy." As if given the access to divorce and the right to remarry, no thank you, men would flee their wives and abandon their children at the first legal opportunity. The legal context of social behaviours tends to have a much lesser influence on the actual behaviour than we think. Were that not the case, then no Irish women would ever have abortions. No gay men would have had sex before homosexual acts were decriminalised. No one would take recreational drugs, and no woman would ever be beaten. Similarly, unrestricted is a weighty term. It insinuates that medical care for women should be somewhat restricted by default, and that were it available to all, like any other healthcare, this would somehow be dangerous or unwieldy or worrisome. Why? Why do we want to restrict women from medical care for any other reason than claiming ownership over their decision making, or an inherent distrust in their ability to make decisions about their own bodies for themselves? We do not hear about unrestricted knee surgery or unrestricted heart bypasses. We do not have debates about what kind of medical care men should be allowed access to. We don't talk about biopsies on tap or those widely available appendix removals. We don't speak of restrictions around Viagra prescriptions or denying men vasectomies, no thank you, as if men couldn't be trusted to make decisions about their own reproductive organs. The language around the access to abortion is a product of its restriction, and we need to be mindful of that, and how language is manipulated to insinuate that women shouldn't have access to medical care because their bodies need to be controlled and policed by a state and or a religion. We also need to remember that Ireland is the only democratic society in the Western world to have a constitutional ban on abortion. And we need to remember that because we need to be mindful that we are living in an extraordinary context regarding this issue. And it is very beneficial to try as often as possible to remove ourselves, at least in an abstract way, from that context in order to understand what is fair and what is right. Were abortion legal, should anyone be able to access it? Yes. Does that mean that the access to abortion would be unrestricted? Yes. This is merely a practicality of medical care access, not a judgment call or a moral quandary. On that basis, and many others, I urge you to propose the motion, and I would end with saying, who are you, anyone in this room, who are you to tell a woman what she can or can't do with her own body? Thank you.
So first of all, before going into this at all, I want to just distance myself from both politics and religion, because just to be open about it, I'm not particularly conservative, but also it doesn't matter whether I'm religious or whether anyone is religious in this debate, because religious views have no place in forming public policy. That should not be the basis upon which we're deciding whether or not the government should adopt a pro-life stance. However, the abortion argument and the pro-life argument does extend far beyond that. What I do believe is that at its very, very basic heart, at its very core, literally the number one reason that the government exists is to protect our lives and ensure our quality of life and basically the fact that we can continue to exist. That's its number one goal through the military, health regulation, whatever. But then come the court system and regulating trade and what have you, and all of those are very important rights that were guaranteed, but we couldn't appreciate those rights unless we were alive. So at its basis, the government is there to ensure that we have the right to live uninfringed upon. It's super stripped down, but it's pretty universal. Sure.
Considering that no person can be forced to give an organ or something to another person to allow them to live because of bodily autonomy, why is this situation?
So the government isn't it's not really a direct parallel in the sense that the government's not forcing anyone to get pregnant, right? The government's not going out and saying you have to carry this baby for 9 months. It's a woman super unfortunate. Obviously, if it happened to me, I wouldn't want to be pregnant at this point in my life. But no one forced me to get pregnant. It's just a horrible, horrible thing that happened. But I'll get to that later. So just wait. Their task that we're going to focus on here is securing lives of its constituents. Because if a fetus up for abortion can ultimately be considered to be alive, then it isn't a left versus right or a liberal versus conservative political issue. Instead, it literally becomes the primary purpose of the government to protect it and to ensure that it, as a constituent, can be alive. So on that topic, whether or not a fetus is alive, several things. First of all, we need to define life. So everyone in this room can agree that a flower is alive, a tree is alive, a blade of grass is alive, yeast is alive, right? And they aren't sentient things. Obviously, they can't think. So sentience and brain functions are not a determinant of whether or not an organism is alive. And okay, that's fine. Most pro-choice people accept that. But these organisms, another argument is, right, they don't feel pain. And neither does it, at many stages, a developing fetus. Sure, that's also true. Some fully grown adults don't feel pain. Anyone with a disease called congenital analgesia is physically incapable of feeling pain anywhere in their body. And no one is going around arguing that it's okay for these fully grown adults who can't feel pain to die just because it doesn't hurt them, right? So the fact that a young forming fetus can't feel pain is not a reason to be pro-choice. It's a reason that abortion is less inhumane than a lot of people might paint it to be, but it's not a reason that abortion is okay in the first place. No, thank you. But second, scientifically, a fetus is an organism. From the minute of fertilization, the zygote has a unique DNA sequence and a genetic composition that is entirely different from any human being who has ever lived. And that is human DNA, a person's DNA, sure.
Okay, consider that for most women who take an abortion, it's an incredibly traumatic experience for them. They recognize this right. Presumably, there are certain circumstances where this is the best thing for them, for their lives, even taking into account that like balance of rights must exist. They still recognise that that's why it's wrong.
Yeah, I agree. And like, obviously, I'm not like going to be one of those people who comes up here and says like, oh, like if you have an abortion, you're a bad person. No, that's absolutely not true. It is a horrible, traumatic thing. A lot of like thought goes into it. Like, obviously, you take all of your life experience there, and it really like changes who you are. It's not something that anyone wants. That being said, sorry, I'm still answering this one. That being said, though, like, just because it's better for the woman, it doesn't always necessarily mean that, like, as a person who believes that, like, a developing fetus is a person, it's not better for that developing fetus. And I'll get to, like, weighing that in a second as well. So genetically, that fetus, is a human being because it is a human genetic code, and an overwhelming majority of, like, everyone knows this. Like, it's not even a pro-life, pro-choice thing. Like, it has a human genetic code. At later stages, it has a functioning tissue and organs, and at the earliest stages, it's just cells. But cells are only found in living things. Like, that's just how they work. So it's a unique, living, and distinctly human organism, whether or not it's sentient, whether or not it feels pain, whether or not it can think. And honestly, like, if that's not how you define what it means to be human, I'm not really sure how you would. But what you have to weigh here, then, is a woman's bodily autonomy versus, like, the rights of this fetus, right? So a woman does have the right to control her body, and, like, she deserves this right no matter where she lives. I'm a woman. I want that right. I would be incredibly angry if someone were to take that away from me. But I also believe that those rights apply even if you are in, like, the womb, even if you're a woman or a man in the womb. Regarding the POIs that were given to the last ops speaker, sex-selective abortions don't just happen in countries like India. Every year, 5,000 more girls are aborted in the United Kingdom than boys, which is so far beyond statistically significant that it's clear it is a conscious choice by some people, right? And, sure.
Like you said, that sex-selective abortions happen outside of third world countries as well.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of placing a restriction on the access to abortion itself, like in India, the restriction is placed on the determination of the sex. Don't you think that's the way to go through that? That's the right thing?
I mean, clearly it's not working. There are still sex-selective abortions. Even when you put those, like, restrictions in place, sex-selective abortions still happen. You can't completely regulate them away. No, thank you. I am a feminist. I'm not sure who prop is to come up here and tell me that I'm anti-woman, that I am, quote, dressing up misogyny as fake feminism. I am a feminist. You cannot take that away from me for being pro-life. I believe women have a right to live. I believe they have a right to be born. I don't believe in these types of abortions. But another group that gets absolutely decimated, no thank you, by abortion are the disabled. In the States, 87% of babies with Down syndrome are aborted. In France, that's 96%. In Iceland, that is 100%. This is not, as framed by the prop, or like pro-choice in general, a quality of life issue. The disabled are not unhappy to be alive. My sister's deaf. I work with autistic children. No thank you, I'm in protected time. And like the idea that only neurotypical, fully abled people have lives worth living, high quality lives, is absolutely ludicrous. It's the worst case of ableism I've ever heard. On prop, Izzy specifically mentioned gender selective and quality of life abortions, and she said that, yeah, they're bad, but women take this into consideration, and they only, like, perform these abortions if it's best for them. But that's not best for the disabled. To choose who's born and who's not, based upon their physical strength, their genetic code, and their characteristics, is a technique as old as time, and that technique is called eugenics. Unfortunately, Anna, our side can be called anti-choice, and like, I agree with that. Sure, maybe we are anti-choice. That's what we're called all the time, no one denies that. But honestly, like, it's okay. We're constantly allowed to ask others to perform, like, abortions, right? To, like, just because we personally wouldn't have abortions, to allow them to be legalized on a national scale. But at the point at which the pro-life side believes that to abort is to end a life, and you're asking us to allow, by our, like, standard, other people to end those lives, that is literally like asking us to, like, allow people to engage in murder, and just because we wouldn't want to do it, not do it ourselves.
Go to the airports.
I flew here from America, like, all right, thank you.